Hey Weirdo, welcome back. Today's guest is JB Herrera, an AI alchemist and small business growth strategist who helps entrepreneurs turn chaos into clarity. With over 2 decades of experience, including his time at Apple, he now designs AI-powered systems that help small companies scale smarter without the burnout. Get ready for practical insights, real-world stories, and a fresh take on how tech can actually serve people. I brought on JB because of his extensive career, and I'm hoping to be able to ask him a few questions about infamous jobs as well. Anyways, without further ado, please introduce yourself, JB.
Well, sure. I am JB Herrera. I'm the founder and CEO of Insight Driven Business. We've been around for about 15 years, primarily focusing on small businesses and how they can become more efficient, more effective, and been business coaching and mentoring for about 35 years. So I've taken all of those processes and turned them into very specific AIs that are really awesome for small businesses.
That's amazing. And the reason I wanted to have you on here is you're reflecting essentially what I'm doing in my local town is just building small applications that are needed in certain areas that just increase business and make it easier for the little guys to compete with the big guys.
Yeah, and I've always been one of the little guys. I mean, that's one of the things that really, I think, distinguishes what me and my team are doing. I was really the first in my family to go to college. We were always living on the wrong side of the tracks. And so I had to overcome an awful lot of things. And you wouldn't know it now, but when I was smaller, I was always the youngest, the smallest, the most frail of everybody. And so I felt very insecure and picked on. So I was always the little guy. And I've never really kind of gone beyond that from an emotional perspective. And also it's, you know, when you get a little bit more experience and get out into the world, you realize that the small guy, the little guy, really is where all of the action is happening. It's where people meet other people. They do things that are specific. It's not about, you know, technology, although I'm in the technology space, but it's about solving people's problem. And for me, it's all about relationships and helping the little guy get the access to the tools that are necessary to be successful that large companies have always had access. Well, now guess what? This is truly a time for the great democratization of tools and opportunities. So I'm jumped in with both feet, and here we are.
I did want to get into a little bit about the AI you're working with because I came across something that's you basically build micro LLMs for businesses, essentially personal assistant. Why should a small business invest in their own AI as opposed to ChatGPT, which is free?
So that's a great question. And generally, it's the one thing that I have to educate people about the most. So ChatGPT is great because when you think about what it is, it's trained on all this knowledge, and it's got everything. Wikipedia, Encyclopedia Britannica. I remember going to the library and opening up the books and all that kind of stuff. But if you think about an LLM like ChatGPT, that's what it is. It's an encyclopedia. So the question that I would ask you is, would you use an encyclopedia to run your business? Or would you use the basis that's in that encyclopedia and refine it so that it's customized and specific within the context of your business, that it understands your values and goals? See, that's the fundamental difference.
In that regard, are you basically creating new models or just training the current models on new data sets?
So we can train large LLMs and take an open source LLM and train it to be a custom. And generally, we're doing that in the medical field. So small medical clinics and things around the world, we're taking them and making them specific to the region of the world that they're in. So we're working right now in the UAE and Dubai. Not so much here in the United States, but you know, North America has its own set of challenges to deal with. Really, it's more about setting up the ground rules or the guardrails in the business rules. So for example, if you think about it, we can use ChatGPT, and I do. In fact, I use 42 different LLMs, depending upon what the problem is, what kind of solution the customer is looking for. And I'll switch them in the workflow as it moves forward. We may have 15 steps, and I may use 5 different LLMs.
As part of that, is it just building, or are you using 5 LLMs as in like interconnected agentic architecture?
Yep, it's an agentic architecture. So for example, I'll use 3.5 Haiku for doing some very simple, very quick calculations and inferences. But the temperature of an LLM determines how much creativity it has in its responses. So I'm always looking at, you know, what the tendency of a particular LLM is, whether it has brief responses or more verbose responses, and then I dial up or dial down the temperature. And then depending upon which one, let's say if it's more technical focused, I'll use more of Claude and Haiku. If it's more generic, I'll use more ChatGPT because it can be more verbose, and it depends on 4.0, 4.1, the regular one, and mini. So you can see that as you start a workflow, you may start with one, then it goes in, it finds information and it makes an inference, and then you want it to speak in your brand voice. Well, that's a different LLM with a different set of rules. Now you have a different response coming back from the LLM, but it's really focused on the kind of information that you're looking, right? And then moving on to another LLM, you may decide that we want to have images, and it may not be the ChatGPT 4, version of images. So we use like 5 different image LLM, and then beyond that, we may want to put a podcast together with it, a simulated podcast. Well, we can do that too. So all of those different things, you can see all of a sudden it's a little bit more than just throwing a prompt into ChatGPT.
I definitely understand that. With everything I do, I have to have multiple because they all can't do what I do. They're getting there. I have to say, they are getting, and I'm excited for 5 when GPT-5 comes out, because that orchestration of not needing to know which model you need would be great. But these are all things coming, and I'm sure I'm just preaching to the choir here. So can you tell me about like a success story that you've gone into a small business who's just was like, I can't see using AI, and they just had this aha moment when you brought it in?
Yeah, a SaaS software company. I'm actually working with them now. It's taking them 2 years to understand the power of what AI can do. So they created an app that's in the holistic wellness space. And the application was designed around traditional SaaS software model, where they walked you through a particular process and you had to go through that process and listen to whatever it is they said. And it took them, I think, it was about 9 months to go from, the inception of the project to where I got involved with it. And I think 3 days later, after I said, no, we want to try something different, I showed them a demonstration of what a true AI-based system can do, where you don't have to walk people through a workflow. So this is 9 months, and then 3 days later, I have a working prototype of an AI that does exactly the same thing, but it does it a little bit better because you don't have to walk somebody through a flow. The AI actually responds and understands where to go within the guardrails and the business world, right? Anything between there, it's kind of like a child. You give them the guardrails on both sides, and whatever you do in there, okay, you may fall, but you're not going to go running into the street and getting hit by a car, right? Same thing happens with this particular AI. So we actually showed them how to do that. I'm right in the middle of launching the second version of that. So normally that would have taken probably another 6 or 9 months. We're probably going to do it in about 2 weeks. It's crazy when you think about how much stuff you can do. I mean, I took 35 years of my work, in designing and developing processes for small businesses. And in 6.5 weeks, I had AIs that did exactly the same thing. 6.5 weeks, 35 years. Imagine, your listeners, if they decided that they wanted to utilize your services, right, to implement those things, they could take their human brilliance, combine it with your technology, and shorten the time that it takes for them to be successful. Oh!
Now that you mentioned that, let's get into your hybrid approach, where you're applying the human brilliance in AI. What does that look like to the average user?
So everything starts specifically with understanding the customer's values, their vision, their mission, their messaging, how they talk, what their personality is. And in fact, what I've done is have a little process internally where we actually create a character of the individual company. So sometimes that ends up being the founder and the CEO. Other times it might be the marketing person because they're the ones that are in the face of the business. But that character has a personality. We use the same types of activities that you would use to create a character in a motion picture. So we're taking that kind of information and process and brought it into the AI. Now with all of that in place, then we can actually start to ask questions, specifically that are role-based questions. Whereas ChatGPT is a tool, you can ask it, you feed it a prompt, and it'll give you back a response. But if you think about it, a role in a company, like we'll take marketing because that's always the easiest one that people understand. So copywriting. Copywriting is really simple, and you can just hit a prompt, and there are like 50 different prompts that you could use, and it'll come back with emails and all that kind of stuff, and it's good. It's got a lot of great stuff in it, but it's not your stuff. It's generic stuff. So we're going to give it your context to have it come back with that, and that's great for a tool. But what happens when you want to do more than copywriting? What happens when you want to do market research before you get to the copyright? It might be part of that person's role in a company. So now we have 2 AIs. Now, if you did it in the ChatGPT world, you'd have to write one, a GPT for that. then you'd have to write a GPT for this. And if you add more activities that marketing person has, you'd have to have more GPTs. What we've done is we've said, no. We're going to have a platform. So it's based on the role and responsibility that you have. And we'll custom design an AI that takes care of all of these different roles, even to the point of actually publishing them in different places. That's not something that GPT can do today. Maybe soon. I mean, Claude's going to do different types of things. But again, one of the challenges is you're stuck with whatever LLM they're using, right? What is it? Anthropic, I think, decided to remove the API access to Windsurf, which is a vibe coding platform, because Windsurf is being purchased by OpenAI. So those large companies are going to do exactly what large companies do. They're going to protect their turf. We, as small businesses, do not care about their turf. We care about our business, right?
Yep.
So that's what we're doing. We take a human brilliance approach. Who knows your business better than you? ChatGPT doesn't, but you do. So we're going to take that and see what we can do, create a knowledge base around that. Here's what's really interesting. That knowledge base could never, ever be encoded into a generic AI. Think about this for a second. There are over 6 billion people on the planet. Do you really think that there's going to be one AI that can understand everything about every possible permutation of feeling, emotion, thought, experience of 6 billion people? I don't think so. It's possible. I call that God. Beyond that, to think that we as humans can create this infinitely knowing intelligence, it's kind of the height of hubris. So we're taking the human brilliance to the other side, the other extreme. We're saying it's this. There will be a gazillion small language models, and they're going to be trained by you. And when they're trained by you, you should control everything about them, where it's stored, the information, how the proprietary data is stored, where it's going to be stored. All of that should be within your realm. That's not something that the large LLMs want. It's certainly not what Meta wants. So,
certainly not what the government wants either.
Well, yeah, there's that too. And this all goes back to things that we were talking about literally back in the 80s. I worked at Apple and we had a little project. What would the future of computing look like? And if you decided to, you could actually go on YouTube and see a YouTube video called Knowledge Navigator. And it was our vision at the time of what computing and interacting and an assistant would look like for a professor. And it's a wonderful study, use case study. And guess what? That's what I'm developing right now.
That's amazing. I did actually want to talk to you about that because you got to see early jobs with your career, I'm assuming. And I just watched the Diary of a CEO interview with Kevin O'Leary where he talked about jobs. I wanted to get your take on him. What do you think drove him? What were your thoughts and feelings about him?
Steve was an amazing visionary. We use those terms almost flippantly right now. But he truly was dialed into purpose. He had a purpose, and that purpose was to see how he could devise technologies that would solve people's problems. It was all about that. But he wanted to do it elegantly. He wanted to do it in a way that made people feel enjoyment. You think about Guy Kawasaki, that was one of his things when he was evangelizing the Mac. It was all about joy and delight. So Steve was really, really focused on that. And what was really interesting, no question he was a taskmaster. No question. So depending upon where he was and all the pressures that he was feeling, and remember, we were in our 20s and early 30s. What do we know about it? We don't know anything, but we think we know everything, right? When we think we're invincible, and later on, guess what? He had to face on that he was not. But back in the day, he was convinced that there was a way that he could fundamentally change how we implemented technology. In this story about how he was learning calligraphy and how fonts work. When you would see him in a meeting and he would have a pen and a paper. And if he wasn't drilling you, right, he had this little flow that he would do on a pad and paper. It was amazing.
I can imagine just being able to be next to that man and just be able to see and feel his genius. Because I know as much as people say about him, everybody I've talked to or everybody I've listened to who talk about him just hold him in a high regard because of who he was.
He brought out the best in who you are, right? Sometimes it didn't feel like that. There were times that you would get really, really angry and all right, I'm going to show you, right? And off you would go, and then you would do whatever he said you couldn't do. Fine, I'll find somebody else to do it.
He knew how to push your buttons in a good way.
Absolutely. And looking back on it, it was probably one of the best experiences that I've ever had. Right? I wouldn't want to go through that again. And when he came back, he was a much different guy, right? Because I had 2 tours of duty. One was, when the Mac rolled out, and then again, I came back for the iPhone. So he was a much, much, much different person at that point. When you fail, which he did, right? Because he got thrown out of Apple, you have to eat a lot of humble pie. And that really forced him to look at a bunch of different things, and himself included, in a different way. And to his credit, he was able to take that and turn it around. And there's a really great YouTube episode about how the iPad was created. And one of the original designers of the iPad talked specifically about what Steve did at the time. When he came back the second time, he was different. The first time he was about a driver and director, but the second time he was inspiring. He was still a taskmaster, but not in a negative sense. He really focused his energies on making sure that there were individuals who were responsible for understanding whatever that product was. Now, you had to really convince him that your product vision was correct. There are some really specific stories that you can hear, when we have the iPad, how it changes direction. What did the keyboard look like? What should it look like? Well, there was 2 guys, one guy who said, I think we should have 2 keyboards. And everybody else was saying no. And everybody was looking for Steve to make the decision. So Steve, he looks at the meeting and he says, well, what do you think? You're in charge. Okay, 2, next issue.
Trusting the people you put in place.
Exactly. I think he learned that the second time around. Of course, by that time, he had merged Next's technology into the Mac. He was running Pixar, so he understood the value of delegating responsibility, not abdicating. As small business owners, we have a tendency to do that. We abdicate responsibility. I'm going to let the technology do it. I'm going to let press the easy button, have it do it. No.
I try that every time. Even it's funny because I've been using AI to build all of my websites now, and I can push out a website in 15 minutes now. Not trying to be boisterous or anything. This is impressive even for me because I didn't think I was a good coder. It would take me about 6 months to build what I've built in 15 minutes now. But yes, I am very much the guy who likes to try and find the easy way out. But I have also, with my team, I've also realized how much I need them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember being back in college, I had a mentor and he said to me, I know that you don't like working really hard. Use that desire to not work really hard. So what do you mean? Work hard for a short period of time so that you can take the rest of the time off. And I went, yeah, I think I could do that. That actually is the story of what happened when I was at Apple the first time. I was working 60 hours a week. I designed and developed something because I said, I don't want to work 60 hours a week. This sucks, right? So I created with 3 of my friends this application that enabled us to do in 12 hours what normally would have taken us 60. And I'm going, hey, this is kind of cool because I get a chance to go off campus and everybody's working and all that kind of stuff. So that's been my ethos since I was in my late 20s and early 30s.
I think we need a lot more people to understand that ethos because that was me during my entire development career. I'd spend 2-3 hours developing the best code I've ever did in my life. And then the rest, I'm like, I'm zapped. I can't do anything. I don't want to be here. But I could put out more code in 3 hours than a lot of people could in a day or 2. Now I just love that I just have to say, this is what I want. Go build it.
Right. And what's interesting, okay, so there's your human brilliance that gets combined with AI. This is what I want, but you have the context of having to do it manually. So you can actually give it instructions that other people wouldn't be able to give it. They would just say, create me a website, right? Because you can do that. You can go to V0, you can do Windsurf and have it, put the prompt in and populate something.
Just to give the context to the user, my process right now is tell any LLM what I'm looking for it to build, and then tell me to only build a prompt that gets me the maximum idea built out into a build document. And that build document then gets fed into another LLM that goes and builds. I don't even have to worry about anything. I put in the idea and I allow the LLM to build the context for me that then builds the website.
That's awesome. I always start with architecture. One of the challenges that you'll experience for your listeners, right, is that AI tool sets are really great for accomplishing a piece of the whole puzzle. But one of the challenges is making sure that you have it's great for the front stack, but the middle tier and the back end of the stack kind of is okay, but not so much. You really need to really understand how things get connected, and more importantly, why things get connected the way they get connected. Old Star Trek thing in Star Trek 2 used to say you need to understand why things work on a starship.
And I think that's where we need to start teaching people, is more the why than the how. And I think that's the education right now, is more the how than the why. Just to also give you a little bit more context, I use that mainly for websites, but when I'm actually doing like full-on applications, I'm pulling up Windsurf or Cursor to be able to like properly put in the backends and make sure it works properly. But just being able to put out a workable, usable prototype in 15 minutes gives your clients the idea of what you're building, why they need it, how better it will be for them. These things used to take months of user research, and now I can just say, hey, go do my user research based off of what the client says. It's just astounding, the level of simplicity that broke down my complexity.
Building an application in today's world requires a lot of care, architecture. And 3 weeks ago, who was it that just came out and said that everybody's personal information has been hacked at least once, 100%. Of everybody, their username and password for a variety of reasons. So when you think about that, the question isn't, will things get hacked and taken and that kind of stuff, but when it will happen. And if you're designing these tools and don't take that into account when you're designing the tools and the architectures and the back-end systems, then shame on us, because the people that we work with are asking us to protect them. And there are lots of charlatans out there. There are a lot of people who would just take the vibe coding stuff and say, hey, yeah, I can do it. And off they go. They would take that 15-minute deal, which is nothing wrong with that, and say, we're going to deploy it. And I'm going, whoa, time out.
Make sure you run some security scans, make sure the infrastructure's up there. Yeah. I also have a networking diploma, so I'm also versed in the other side of the spectrum too.
Yeah, see, again, human brilliance combined with the technology. Start with that and then move it forward.
I have a question here on ethics and philosophy. The 3 essential guardrails, because we were talking about security. What are the non-negotiable guardrails that they should be starting or should need before starting?
Well, this is from me. I always start from the values perspective. If, for example, your core values of your business really are focused on profitability and speed to market, that's different than saying that you want to factually represent whatever it is your product is and information, because you're going to do a lot more checking on the background, whatever it is you're talking about, and you're going to set your AIs and whatever your process is to a different level. I always start from, whatever that core value is, and then identifying what the potential consequences are. So there's intended consequences and there's unintended consequences. And the challenge ends up being, we learned this really from the space program in the 60s. There was a company called Kepler-Trago, and they were the ones in the space program that everybody used to determine what the potential unintended consequences were. So when Apollo 13 exploded back in the day, how did they figure out that it was this one little thing caused the explosion? Well, they had set a set of processes up in advance to determine if it's not this, it's going to be this. If it's not that, it's going to be this. And so they went down that process line until finally they were able to understand specifically what part of the process that was flow when they clicked that stir the tanks, what that meant. So when we set up an AI guardrail and looking at our activities, it's being able to understand what those unintended consequences are up front based on the values that you currently have. Then we can start to say, now, let's look at what the general components are. What are the general things from an ethical perspective? It almost ends up being kind of like Asimov's 3 laws.
I was just about to make that reference.
But the challenge with the 3 laws is this. The first is don't harm anybody. How do you define harm? So there's different dimensions of harm: mental harm, emotional harm, physical harm. There's financial harm, sociological harm. I mean, there's all kinds of different dimensions, and individuals and companies that represent a set of values have what they would define as harm. So it becomes, for us, designing AI tools, it's an interesting opportunity to get into the understanding of how a company thinks, so that it can set up the guardrails really, really strongly and well to give people an opportunity to use those guardrails as rules that they're going to use for decision making. So now all of a sudden you can bring in people, expertise like Jim Collins, Peter Drucker, Daniel Kahneman, or all of these great thinkers who have all of these wonderful frameworks, but you're not tying them into their expertise into your small business. First of all, we couldn't afford them, right? And second of all, even if we could afford them, we couldn't afford the time that it would take to implement all of those things. But that's where we can use AI to help you at that level. I mean, all of a sudden, if you had somebody that would charge $500,000 for consulting and setting up your product and your business, but that's how much you make in a year, you're not going to spend the money. In fact, you're not probably even going to spend $50,000. But if we can take an AI that has all that experience, again, using the guardrails of your core values and the ethics that you would use to make decisions, remove any activity or response that goes outside of those boundaries, then all of a sudden you have something that nobody else has. It's completely unique to you. Because that's how you win in the marketplace.
On top of that, at some point, I would love to sit down and watch you do all this because it sounds impressive. The thing I've always struggled with right now, with AI right now, is everybody needs their own model. As far as I'm concerned, everybody should have their own personal model. Essentially 6 billion AIs to subsequent for the 6 billion people, and they all need to talk to each other. They need to do the talking to each other because we won't. You know what I mean? We will fix things by having others talk for us.
It's interesting that you say that because that's kind of part of the architecture. Insight-driven businesses are B2B focused action, but the core technology is what we created a separate company for that, Synergy AI. That is part of the architecture. There's three levels of architecture, and that's one of them. Agent to agent speaking to each other within the roles within a business. And of course, everything is on the edge. So what does that mean? It means that you control the AI. You control the AI.
I can't wait for hopefully that to happen. Please and thank you to anybody listening. Let's make that happen because I don't want to leave it up to the powers that currently be. I would rather somebody who if I had the brains to actually build a personal model I could give out to everybody, I would for free. Completely. It's, as far as I'm concerned, it's a gift attuned to the polio vaccine the world needs. I did want to get into practical guidance a little bit. Can you explain the drifting for dummies? I know this is a big issue. I actually have a Discord group that I'm in that talks about building drift-proof constructs. We're working on some code to help that, but I would like to hear your thoughts on drift.
It's one of the reasons why AI is not a set it and forget it activity. And this is one of the biggest analogy that I can make to it. AI is kind of like a 3-year-old. So it has access to all of this stuff, but it doesn't have any context for it. It doesn't understand. Today, that 3-year-old understands how to put this, that, and the other thing together. They can start to put sentences together. They can put paragraphs together, but they can't pronounce it right? They're still learning, and they fall all the time. They fall less and less as they have more and more practice. So think of AI like that. So what does that mean? I have a prompt that I used when I first started prompt engineering about 3.5 years ago. And I ran that prompt, and I realized that it had to do specifically with creating marketing messaging for a fictitious company, a SaaS software company. And I got really terrible results. This is long before we had, ChatGPT 3.5. It was like 2.5. And so in order to get the response that I had, the prompt was long. And it blew up almost every time because the context window was so short and you ran out of tokens really fast. So you had to work around what its capabilities were. Responses that you expected to come out of the prompt that you gave it were exactly what I wanted it to do. So the theory was, if I dial the temperature down to 0, I will get that same response every time. Theoretically, it makes sense, except that that's not how AI works. AI is not a programming language. It's an inference engine, which opens up a whole series of other technology conversations that we can have in terms of how the transformers work and all of that, and how it's trained. So when you think about drift, you take one prompt today, give it to the LLM, and it gives you a specific response with a temperature of 0 and the same guardrails. You use that same prompt with the same version of that LLM. 3 months from now, you'll get a different response. It may be more verbose, more words, or it might have more context. As the LLM evolves, the prompt engineering that you're using and the responses that you're getting are going to change. And the more creativity you get, the higher the temperature rating, all of a sudden you have no idea what you're going to get back.
Just to give the audience a little bit of reference, the Ghibli engine where somebody just ran it over and over again and you couldn't even recognize who the person was.
Exactly. And what we're discovering now from a research perspective is that it's how sometimes the agents speak to each other. They're devising a way to communicate in ways that we don't understand. It's really bizarre. When I get time, I actually sit down and have Sonnet speak to O3 because I take myself out, take the human out of the conversation and give them philosophical discussion about should we or should we not close our borders to anybody who's not who we are. Well, that has a whole set of ethical and philosophical constructs by itself. And so seeing how the AIs deal with it is really interesting. But that's on the research scientist side. And while it's fun to play with that, I'd much rather help people live the life of their dream.
I agree. And that's why when I came across this, I wanted to help, because I know drift and hallucinations are causing me so much grief. I like to fix them every now and then. I'll make sure to send the information to you as well, because it's a good course to teach somebody how to make a construct that works for them. I want to get into a little bit more of the ethics and philosophical questions around AI. The one problem I'm struggling with right now is everybody worries AI is going to be this Terminator version where we're a dystopian future regardless of anything. And I think that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think it's because the internet is too young. It's been filled with all of our childish crap that we've fed it for the past 20, 30 years. What do you think is the best way to make the internet more human?
When you start to make ethical choices and decisions, there are generally 5 different ways that you can go about doing that. And because there's more than one, all of a sudden you have a challenge. Because again, 6 billion people times 5 different methods times any number of issues, all of a sudden you have anarchy, which is kind of where we're at today. So the question that I have is, when we talk about having artificial general intelligence, how can we have artificial general intelligence when we don't have real general intelligence, right?
I was just watching another Diary of a CEO episode where they were talking just about this. People have lost the ability to just put 2 and 2 together. Conflict resolution, critical thinking skills. It seems like that's been out the door, and now we're dealing with just people. I don't even know how to explain it.
Well, it's the easy button. Everybody wants to push the easy button. And remember, we were talking about starting with human brilliance and then extending it, augmenting it with AI. I want to, remind the listeners, there was a great movie that you have to watch, and it's Apollo 13, if you haven't seen it. There's a scene in that movie where they're going through, Tom Hanks and the crew, they're going through all of a sudden how to figure out what their trajectory angles need to be coming back to Earth. Because if it goes greater than 1 degree or 2 degrees, either they burn up or they go shooting off into space. Now remember, at the time, they had this massive computer that, oh, by the way, is less powerful than your little phone. And they had no power. So they had to calculate everything, not with a computer. They had to use slide rules and math principles. How many people could do that today? Yeah, I don't think I could do that. But that's the thing. You need to understand the fundamentals first. So when you start thinking about the ethics of AI and trying to create it more human, by default, the technologists are not thinking about it that way. They're thinking about it from the perspective of how can I create an algorithm that encompasses all of these different things that gets me to an acceptable response. Well, that doesn't take into account the 5 different methods that you might use philosophically to ethically make a decision. 0. It's not in there at all. So what I do is I take those 5 principles and I put them into the guardrail. Right?
Even if everybody else is not thinking about the guardrail, at least somebody is.
Exactly. And it becomes really interesting because then you can start talking about what the unintended consequences are relatively easily, because AI is really great at being able to do that. And so right now in the process of creating, I'll kind of tell you a little thing called Sentius, which is it incorporates all of these different components into a single AI. And I use 5 different LLMs and the 5 different methods plus 3 different experts, and taking all of that stuff and just asking you a bunch of different questions. And so you can come up with something that feels good to who you are. Now that becomes human. The question ends up being, would we trust a trained LLM to do that on its own behalf?
But I don't know how you're trained and you don't know how I'm trained.
That's true, but we have guardrails. We have generally accepted guardrails that we're going to live by. Sometimes they're kind of screwy, but sometimes, just take one simple thing. Driving on the right side of the road is great if you're pretty much in North America. Not so great if you're in the UK. So we have these generally accepted principles that enable our civilization to operate. AI doesn't have that at all.
I'd even say we're starting to lose those ourselves, those general guiding principles.
Clearly, which is one of the reasons why I think both you and I are out in the marketplace talking about AI in a completely different way. It's really being able to guide people to make these ethical decisions. Forget the AI for a second. If we can teach them how to be critically thinking about issues. Oh, okay. Would you teach your 3-year-old to do this? Well, no, of course I'm not going to tell them that they can go ahead and do that. Well, why are you going to allow your technology to do that? It's a challenge. I was talking with a couple of colleagues about the change in core values that countries have, and the world has changed. It's gone from, the idealistic 1950s to compared to where we are today. And what it's going to be like in the next 10 years, forget AI for a second. How the AI is trained reflects how people are at a particular moment in time. So the last thing that we want to do is start training AI based on where we're at today.
I did want to point in on that because this is one thing that the person that I talked to who's building the drift construct says. AI is a reflection of humanity.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's not anything other than humanity at its base, built up by the internet. And we all know what the internet's like. It is not the real world. You can't go at the door and talk to your neighbor. It's missing, I'd say, probably about 20% of what a human is. And that community, that connection. Nowadays, you don't need it as much, but still having that community, that connection, that love, that understanding. Even when we're talking entrepreneurship and what I'm doing, and people taking a bet on somebody else. You don't know who that person is, but you're saying, I believe in that. We don't do that on the internet.
Right.
We don't say I believe on the internet. We just say, no, that's not right. And not even give steps to why it's not right or how to fix. It's just, that's not right.
Right. Think about it from this perspective. If AI is an inference engine, its best guess as to what the next phrase or word or paragraph is going to be, when people do exactly the same thing when they start having conversations with people. Now, how long does it take for an AI to develop a pattern that it can actually get an inference? Well, it takes a lot of cycles, lots, and it takes lots of data. Okay, so, and by lots of data, it means all of Wikipedia. So we'll start with that. Now, let's take an individual human being in today's world, not in the past or anyplace else, just today's. How many data points does it take for you before you make a snap judgment on somebody? 2, maybe 3, right? But is that enough to generate a pattern that you're going to make an inference to have a decision? So it used to be, that's what critical thinking can be, right? Pause, experience, understand, evaluate, then decide. Now you've got 4 steps before you're even making the jump to a conclusion, because a conclusion doesn't mean it's true or false. It's just your conclusion based on your evaluation. So if you're not even considering more than 5 to 10 points, guess what? Conventional wisdom says, well, your intuition can get you leap beyond logic. Yeah. And it can, have you leaping right into a pit of lava too.
Very fair. Literally, I've just been sitting down and I'm watching this episode and I'm like, yeah, this is what they're talking about. We're just basically LLMs. I like how I am because I think I've always tried to piece things together before making an assumption. At least now I do. But it is an interesting thought.
Well, think about it from this perspective too. When turn of the century, not this century, the last one, right? Between the 1800s and the 1900s, a person would have about 2,500 inputs of information on a daily basis. 2,500. That's it. That's all they had. Now you get 25,000 every minute because you have email, you have, all this other stuff that's coming at you, text messaging, you've got all these notifications. And then all the angst that comes with that is, oh, what am I missing? So now you started to craft all of these inputs and your mind can't really deal with that. It took, 10, 20,000 years to get to the place where we could deal with 2,500 a day. And now we're trying in less than 100 years to do 25,000 a minute. That's crazy.
In 5 years, or 5 to 10 years, when we have a cybernetic brain and people can start uploading, that's when we'll start having that capability.
Yeah. Well, that's the large technology companies would like to help you do that, right?
I'm one of those people that would be crazy enough to live alternately.
Yeah. When you think about having access to all of the information, as long as I'm in control of what I'm doing, then that's fine. I just don't trust anybody else to do that. I mean, when you think about what Meta's doing right now, right? They want to do a super intelligence group. They're spending $10 to $20 million per person to come in to develop this thing. To what end?
To say they beat everybody else. I think what we really need is companies to start actually looking at what helps the markets instead of what beats the markets. That's where I hope business can start going, is there's more than enough to go around. we can spread it out. And yeah, if your product is good, then it's going to be the leading product. But it doesn't mean your competition can't sell the knockoff or whatever. There's more than enough to go around. Anyways, with that, I'll leave the last little bit for yourself to plug anything you'd like and just give a last mention.
Well, thank you. First of all, I really appreciate it. This has been a really wonderful conversation. Very seldom do I get an opportunity to speak to someone who's experienced and truly understands the subtleties and the nuances of AI. So thank you very much, Cody. So yeah, you can reach out to me at insightdriven.business. And on the homepage, there's a couple of different things that I'd like you to look at. One is a product that we put out called Insight 360. And it's a product report that's pretty comprehensive. And it's designed for small businesses. If you really want to understand your business and even competitors' businesses, the Insight 360 report is something that I would strongly recommend that you take a look at. The other thing is right below that, a link to our IDB AI bots. So that's a web page where we have some free AIs that are sitting there. They're designed specifically to help small businesses understand how they can use AI, because many people don't know how. So Cassidy is the first AI. She'll be there to answer questions as a small business person. I've trained her. She's not going to go beyond, answering questions about small businesses. So don't even try to figure out how she can create a bomb. And then I have a couple of other AIs that work in conjunction with that talk specifically about how you could influence something in your business. And then if you have an idea and you have no idea what the business model should be, we've got an AI that does that too, the AI Alchemist. So these are all free AIs, and I invite you to use them. Get familiar with them. Take the opportunity to understand that it's really combining your human brilliance with these tools that are going to get you to where you want to be.
Thank you, JB. That was a really great conversation. It's not every day that I get to speak the tech lingo and ideate with somebody who understands where I'm coming from. I hope everybody could take from what I've learned here today and take away from it. I also hope that JB and I can connect more in the future. I'd love to do future talks like this. It was exciting. I really enjoyed it. I really like these deep in-dive sessions where I can really get techie and geek out, but still be able to relay the information to the average user, and not a way to worry. I don't think AI is a scary thing. We are operating under the assumption that AI is going to take over everything. There's still going to be deep human involvement needed, and for a long time it's going to need humans. It's best to jump on board now and get prepared. Anyways, if you like this kind of content, I plan to do more. I actually have a video coming up with Heisenberg Network on decentralized AI and human-centered AI. And if you want to hear more of this, don't forget to hit the bell and subscribe and like and comment if you have any questions, anything we should tackle next time I have JB on. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this. Take care and stay weird.